You have 2 weeks to leave Florida or face the consequences. The message was short, cold, and terrifying. It arrived in the form of a typed letter, slipped anonymously into the mailbox of the Carr family in the quiet town of Alturas. To Pike Carr, the family's patriarch, it seemed like nothing more than a cruel prank, something to ignore, laugh off, and forget. But the letter was no joke. Months later, his wife, Peggy Carr, began to suffer excruciating, unexplained pain. It started as a tightening in her chest, then spread like wildfire down her arms and legs, burning and searing as if her nerves were on fire. Soon, her hair began to fall out in clumps, and the torment worsened by the day. The nightmare didn't stop with her. One by one, other members of the household fell ill: her son Travis, her teenage daughter, and even her stepson. They all experienced the same mysterious agony: tingling in their fingers, intense abdominal cramps, weakness that left them bedridden, and a sensation as though their bodies were being scorched from the inside out. An invisible killer had entered their home. Investigators would later uncover the truth. Someone had laced the family's Coca-Cola bottles with thallium, a deadly heavy metal poison with no color, no taste, and no smell. Once inside the body, it attacked the nervous system, causing unbearable pain, hair loss, and eventual organ failure. Without immediate diagnosis and treatment with the rare antidote, Prussian blue, survival was unlikely. At the time, however, doctors were baffled. When Peggy collapsed at work in October 1988, clutching her chest, she was rushed to the hospital. Tests revealed nothing conclusive, and some even speculated her symptoms were psychosomatic. After 3 days of observation, with no answers and mounting medical bills, she was sent home. It was a decision that would prove catastrophic. Back at the Carr household, the air was thick with dread. Peggy's condition worsened, and soon every member of the family who had consumed the poisoned drinks began to wither. The agony was relentless. Desperate, they returned Peggy to the hospital, where a sharp-eyed physician noticed something chilling. Her hair was falling out in large patches. This was no ordinary illness. The doctor suspected thallium poisoning, a toxin once used in rat poison and insecticides, now banned but still deadly in the wrong hands. Its effects were as cruel as they were unmistakable: burning limbs, stomach convulsions, vomiting, diarrhea, hallucinations, and mental deterioration. Peggy Carr's symptoms were textbook. She had almost every sign of thallium poisoning. The clock was ticking. If treated in time with Prussian blue, the antidote, she might survive. But if diagnosis came too late, thallium would claim its victim. When doctors first suspected poisoning, they immediately ordered specialized tests to measure toxin levels in Peggy Carr's blood. The results, returned the next day, stunned everyone. Peggy's thallium levels were 20,000 times higher than the safe limit. Joanne and Travis also tested positive for the poison, though at lower concentrations. Further tests revealed that Pike Carr, his daughter Jelena, and granddaughter Casey were also contaminated mildly, but undeniably. No one could understand how an entire family in small-town Alturas had ingested such a rare and deadly substance. Thallium poisoning is seldom considered in routine diagnostics, and by the time doctors identified it, valuable time had already been lost. Peggy's condition plummeted. Every breath became torture. She lost her ability to speak, forced to communicate through hand gestures, before slipping into a deep coma. On the 3rd of March, 1989, after more than 4 months of unimaginable suffering, the Carr family made the agonizing decision to remove Peggy from life support. She died at age 41, leaving behind grief that words could not describe. Doctors fought to save the others. Joanne was discharged after 2 months of intensive treatment, while Travis spent 6 months in the hospital, barely clinging to life. The case of Peggy Carr was now officially ruled a homicide, triggering a full-scale investigation. At first, suspicion fell on her husband, Pike Carr. Their marriage had been strained, and he wasn't home when the symptoms first appeared. But this theory collapsed when tests showed that Pike himself had traces of thallium in his system. He wasn't the killer. He was a victim. The investigation shifted focus to the source of the poison. Detectives combed through the Carr home, testing water, plants, and every object they could find. Then came the breakthrough. Traces of thallium were found in several glass bottles of Coca-Cola inside the house. These bottles became the smoking gun. Forensic experts discovered not only the presence of thallium in unopened bottles, but also subtle tool marks on the caps, signs that the bottles had been carefully opened, poisoned, and resealed. The tampering was so precise that it was nearly undetectable. This was no random contamination from a factory or store. This was a targeted attack, executed with skill and planning. FBI specialists concluded the poison was introduced manually, using specialized equipment. The implication was chilling. Someone had deliberately infiltrated the Carr home to place the poison bottles where the family would drink them. In a town where residents rarely lock their doors, such a scenario was not just possible, it was likely. When questioned, Pike struggled to think of anyone who might want his family dead. Then he remembered a long-standing feud with their next-door neighbors, George T. Trepal and Diana Carr. While Diana shared the Carr surname, she was unrelated to the victims. The couple had repeatedly complained about noise coming from the Carr home dogs, barking, loud music, and the antics of Peggy's sons. The disputes escalated with Joanne and Travis, provoking them further, blasting music, setting off fireworks, and tearing through their yard on motorcycles. Despite the tension, Pike maintained a certain level of friendliness toward George, who always appeared quiet and polite. The children even described him as shy, harmless. But behind closed doors, resentments festered. Diana was vocal about her hatred for the noise and chaos. George, however, kept his anger hidden. In March 1988, George Trepal filed an official complaint to the local council, opposing Pike Carr's renovation of his garage into a small apartment for his daughter and granddaughter. The complaint succeeded. Pike was fined for illegal construction, forced to halt the work, and had to pay a hefty sum to legalize the modifications. The dispute deepened the animosity between the two households. Tensions escalated further in July 1988, just 3 months before the poisoning. The Carrs received an anonymous, typed letter addressed directly to Pike. "You have 2 weeks to leave Florida forever, or the consequences will be severe. This is not a joke." Pike dismissed it as an empty threat, a prank. That mistake would prove deadly. Only 2 days before Peggy's symptoms began, Diana stormed over to the Carr home, furious about the music volume. Her rage was so intense, it shocked the family. Peggy calmly opened the door, insisting the noise was reasonable and refusing Diana's demand. Diana stormed off, shouting over her shoulder, "Just wait, this isn't over." Given the direct threats and bitter hostility, investigators quickly turned their attention to George Trepal and his wife Diana. But they soon realized this wasn't going to be a simple case. Both George and Diana were highly intelligent, members of Mensa, the elite society for individuals with IQs in the top 2% worldwide. Diana was an orthopedic surgeon with a chemistry background. George, a self-proclaimed computer programmer who worked from home, seemed less imposing but no less dangerous. At first, suspicion fell heavily on Diana, given her medical and chemical expertise. Yet the FBI profile shifted focus to George. He fit the profile perfectly: a white male, slight build, gifted intellect, yet passive in conflict. Averse traits often masking a deep, simmering resentment. When interrogated, George appeared nervous, avoiding eye contact, answering questions haltingly. When asked why someone would poison the Carr family, he coldly replied, "They were poisoned because someone wanted them to leave this area." Out of over 50 people interviewed, only George offered a motive that aligned precisely with the anonymous threat letter. Realizing he had slipped, George quickly backtracked, claiming he didn't care about the Carrs and insisting he had no knowledge of chemistry, especially not thallium. But the investigation into his background exposed his lies. George Trepal, born in 1949 New York, came from an ordinary family. His father a police officer, his mother a school teacher. His intelligence, however, was extraordinary. Despite claiming ignorance of chemistry, records revealed he had studied it extensively at a South Carolina university before switching to psychology, graduating in 1972. His college years revealed a darker side. George was addicted to heroin and gained a disturbing reputation for secretly slipping drugs into food and drinks just to observe his friends' reactions. The habit escalated. Once, suspecting his roommate had entered his room without permission, George coated the doorknob with a hallucinogenic chemical. The roommate's reaction amused him. On road trips, George would offer hitchhikers cookies laced with heroin, then watch with twisted satisfaction as they lost control. Rumors suggested he even exploited victims who had passed out. George Trepal wasn't just intelligent, he was manipulative, calculating, and sadistic. His history of chemical experimentation and fascination with others' suffering painted a chilling portrait. By 1975, George Trepal's dark experiments had escalated to criminal enterprise. He was arrested in South Carolina for running one of the largest methamphetamine laboratories in the Southeast. The operation was sophisticated, and the drug it produced was devastating. George was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Investigators later noted his lab employed the P2P method, a hazardous process known to cause psychosis and paranoia, and one that sometimes used thallium, the very poison tied to the Carr case. With such a background, George's claims of ignorance about thallium rang hollow. After serving his sentence, George attempted to live what appeared to be a normal life. He met and married Diana at a Mensa gathering, where two brilliant yet socially detached minds connected. Outwardly, their marriage looked ideal. Quiet, intellectual, free of drama. George encouraged Diana's career, and they appeared to neighbors as the perfect couple. But beneath the facade, they shared an unusual passion, an obsession with true crime and unsolved mysteries. George immersed himself in forensic science, self-proclaiming expertise in crime scene techniques. He even hosted murder mystery games for the Mensa Club, designing elaborate mock crime scenes with complex clues. One detail, however, sent chills through investigators. In April 1989, just 1 month after Peggy Carr's death, George and Diana organized a Mensa event featuring a scenario eerily similar to the real-life case. In the flyer, George wrote himself. It read, "When you receive a threatening letter, a wise person will throw away all the food and watch carefully what they eat and drink. There is no such thing as an unsolvable death." The chilling coincidence strengthened investigators' belief. George wasn't just fascinated by murder, he was perfecting it. With the case stalled, Detective Susan Gorick devised an audacious plan. Undercover, she posed as Sherry Quinn, a married woman who could plausibly befriend George while Diana was away at work. Slowly, she earned his trust. Though George never confessed outright, his behavior raised countless red flags. The turning point came when Susan was invited into George's home. There, she found a copy of Agatha Christie's novel, The Pale Horse, a story where the killer uses thallium to commit undetectable murders. To investigators, this was no mere coincidence. It was a signature. In private conversations, George grew bolder, even suggesting that Sherry should poison her husband to gain the upper hand in a divorce. His words were chillingly casual, delivered as if discussing a simple household fix. Susan also discovered that George brewed his own wine and possessed specialized equipment capable of resealing bottles, tools that matched the FBI's theory of how the Carr's Coca-Cola bottles were tampered with. The walls were closing in. The evidence, both physical and psychological, was aligning perfectly. The threat letter, the poisoned Coke, his chemistry background, his fascination with murder, his slip-ups during conversations. George Trepal wasn't just a suspect anymore. The covert operation, codenamed Pearl Horse, was originally intended to last only a few months. But George Trepal was meticulous, cautious to the point of obsession. For nearly 2 years, investigators watched, waited, and gathered evidence, but no direct proof surfaced. Their breakthrough finally came when George and Diana moved to Spring Hill, Florida. Undercover detective Susan Gorick rented their old house, giving forensic teams the opportunity they had been waiting for. The garage was combed inch by inch. At first, nothing stood out. Then, in the far corner, they discovered a small glass vial filled with white powder. FBI testing confirmed their suspicion. It was thallium. With hard evidence in hand, authorities moved quickly. Special agents stormed George's new home. Diana tried to block their way, screaming in fury, but was easily pushed aside. Inside, George, wearing nothing but his underwear, looked at them calmly and said, "Can I put on some clothes?" A subsequent search of the house uncovered damning materials, chemistry manuals, a self-authored booklet titled Chemistry for Idiots, and a thick dossier called A Comprehensive Guide to Poisons. His fingerprints were all over the pages detailing thallium. In January 1991, George Trepal was formally indicted on 15 charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, food tampering, and product interference. His defense argued that the case was built largely on circumstantial evidence, suggesting the vial of thallium could have been planted in the unlocked garage, and even hinting that Diana might have been the real culprit. After 4 grueling weeks of trial, the jury delivered its verdict. George Trepal was guilty. He was sentenced to death. The decision sparked controversy, with critics arguing that capital punishment should only be imposed when there is no room for doubt. To this day, despite numerous appeals, George remains on Florida's death row. Diana divorced him in 1996 and later died of a stroke in 2018. The Peggy Carr poisoning case serves as a chilling reminder. Danger sometimes comes not from strangers in the dark, but from the people living right next door. A single anonymous letter, a few tampered bottles of soda, and a seemingly harmless neighbor unleashed a nightmare that destroyed an entire family. Was George Trepal truly the lone mastermind behind Peggy Carr's death, or do secrets still linger, buried deep beneath the surface? The question remains unanswered, fueling debates about justice, truth, and the nature of evil. Thank you for staying with us through this harrowing journey into one of Florida's most chilling true crime cases. The story of Peggy Carr and the dark genius next door is a reminder that evil can wear the face of an ordinary neighbor and strike when you least expect it. If you found this case as gripping as we did, don't forget to support our channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you'll never miss another deep dive into the world's most mysterious crimes. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe justice was truly served in this case? Or is there more to the story than meets the eye? Share your opinions in the comments. We read every single one. Join us every week as we uncover more unsolved mysteries, cold-blooded killers, and cases that challenge everything you thought you knew about justice.